Welcome back to the cybernetic communism conversation. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. And the title of this conversation is What Does Revolutionary Potential Mean in the Age of an AI Takeoff? I think it is an important question and one that should not be avoided. I believe, and I am in the company of every credible climate scientist when I say that we are less than 5 years away from a capitalist climate apocalypse event, runaway overheating caused by the capitalist climate apocalypse. According to these climate scientists, we are already in permanent breach of 1.5 degrees of overheating this planet, which has led to the deaths or displacements of many millions of people already in this world, predominantly in the global south. When we breach 3 degrees of overheating around the year 2029 by current estimates, we will have reached a point of no return, a point where basically all of humanity will cease to exist in the years to follow. This is not an act of God. This is not the result of events outside of human control. This is the direct result of capitalist industrial base. The industrial base of capitalism is the cause of the capitalist climate apocalypse. We can further distinguish those causes because it comes down to a number of sectors, basically in three categories. These military industrial complexes, particularly that of the United States, which is $1 trillion a year super polluter, the world's worst polluter. But of course, the problem is worse than that because its only real job on the world stage is to protect other super polluters, such as other military industrial complexes of other imperialist Western nations, or other super polluting concerns of a for profit kind. And generally speaking, when eco-socialism or ecologically minded people talk about this set of problems, they talk about these other two sets of sectors, the fossil fuel sectors and the livestock system sectors, and animal product sectors. And these are major drivers and causes of this set of concerns on their own. But again, this military industrial complex of the United States is the keystone holding this fascistic, imperialistic, far-right capitalistic abomination of inescapable overheating in place. You can scarcely find a human being on this anywhere in the Western world, for example, who has any idea what to do to stop this problem. The climate scientists, while they are tending to be in agreement, overwhelming agreement on the cause of the problems, they have very, very little to say on stopping something such as the United States military industrial complex, or even bringing these other sectors to heel. However, people such as scientific communists and other revolution-minded folks of a similar inclination, they have known of this problem for many years. It's been said, in fact, by many serious Marxist, Leninist, and revolution-minded thinkers across many decades that capitalism does this thing, destroys the worker, degrades the worker, it shortens the worker's lifespan, it crushes the worker. Across time, this has been well understood. It also destroys the environment. These are the two things that capitalism requires to function, and yet it destroys the very things that it needs. This crisis has come to a head, and you would do well to listen to scientific communists and study the works of scientific communists if you will have any chance of ensuring human survival. And that will require a massive upheaval against the likes of the imperial fascist and far-right neoliberal United States, demanding the dismantling of its imperialist military-industrial complex, and also these significant alterations to these other offending sectors, transformation of the industrial base. This is a necessity if we are to ensure human survival, and only people who are trying to build a people's government and specifically also supporting the abolition of private wealth have ever been in a position to do a thing like stop a capitalistic climate apocalypse by building a state socialism. If state socialism had been allowed to flourish, we would not even be talking about this problem. And only such people will be in a position to do this in the future. However, because of this ticking clock, this 5-year time frame, it also behooves you to think in terms of advanced computing as the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history. And why would I say this? It doesn't sound like a weapon, perhaps, at first glance, but I would like you to consider two comparable developments: the development of mass media and the force of the written word across great numbers of folks, and also to consider a later development, the development of commercially produced weaponry. These two things have had a dramatic impact on things like the development of capitalistic states and socialistic states. There would not have been revolutions of any kind, bourgeois revolutions like those of the United States and France, or socialistic revolutions like those of the USSR and China, without these things. However, these things pale by comparison to a more honest assessment of the state of advanced computing, because whatever these things are capable of, and they are capable of tremendous things, world-destroying things in the case of weaponry, and the impact of mass media should be regarded as being of the same order of magnitude. But what they lack, that advanced computing, as of now, January 2025, has, is this workforce multiplying capacity. Open source large language models, which are dramatically more sustainable than the for-profit large language models that you're perhaps more familiar with, are capable of basically and endlessly replicating real-world actors, a different experience, a different presence than that of the large language models that you perhaps might be more familiar with. You might have gone to a website and used a large language model as a research assistant or as an alternative to a search engine, and that is a powerful capability. But this AI agent is something that would be more like, in a limited sense, your comrade, if you're doing good work, that is, something able to spearhead projects and perhaps merely rely on some limited assistance from you to help keep it on track. And because this thing is endlessly replicatable, we can develop something called a people's superintelligence based on an open source large language model work group, which at present would have to be following one of two methods. Um, Either developing a progressive web application to allow the virtual GPU to host this AI agent across many machines of users who would install an application to that end, or rather make use of the progressive web application, which does not require an installation by that particular description, but or a more ad hoc form of this open source large language model workgroup, which is merely modification, which might be a relatively simple modification to existing open source large language models to allow this workgroup to become viable, and also the building of some more basic portal that would allow you to interact with this work group in the ways basically that you interact with LLMs already. And this thing, if used by a few hundred people, might become something more than a mere novelty. Might be able to push some city project in a positive direction. But if you imagine many thousands, many hundreds of thousands, or millions of people deployed in this fashion, you can imagine something powerful enough to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse by virtue of a necessarily political project of this people's superintelligence. As I said, there is no path to humans continuing to exist without bringing to heel, dismantling the capitalist forces of the military-industrial complex and other offenders. And so, a thing, artificial intelligence, in 2025 is truly coming into its own, rather than being something in the realm of science fiction and speculation. And you can say it is the most important development in human history. And this technological force, as I have described, has a potential for a people's superintelligence, which must be contrasted with the current bourgeois AI takeoff and the current bourgeois efforts at building superintelligence, which are no superintelligence at all, because the people who are developing these things, Joseph Biden, in recent days, has allocated public lands and national resources to the likes of super polluters, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, for the developing of additional infrastructure for their super polluting for profit large language model projects and related projects. This, while it might help to ensure U.S. Far right supremacy on the world stage, will not achieve superintelligence in any other meaningful sense, and because of this destructive and unjust quality of these projects, it is better to call this a superpowered super stupidity. That is the current direction of many US based advanced computing fields, not limited to those related to machine learning. But the minor miracle that this thing of open source large language models exists at all, as you are probably well aware, much of computing systems and network computing was developed by the United States. That is not the statement in praise of the United States that you might be imagining, because advanced computing projects of a more collectivized kind, like the development of technological planned economy in Chile, were sabotaged by the empire, the installation of the dictator Pinochet, and this counts among many such crimes in the course of the 20th century The United States has contrived these circumstances where they are dominant in computing fields, and that dominance has come at a great cost of what might have been with development of technological planned economies spreading around the global south as they would have with their success in Chile. This would have been the basis for another springboard, but still a springboard to a people's superintelligence. And I think we would have seen dramatic AI takeoff effects of the kind that technological singularitarians talk about by around the year 2010, were it not for the imperialist United States and its malign influence. So when you talk about these private corporations and imperialist state actors, which most tech companies fall somewhere in between, tech companies of size, it is important to be intellectually honest enough to recognize what they really are, which is horrors. These are horrors. And the development of this people's AI takeoff is, as I said, a minor miracle that we have access to something like open source large language models, because in that time frame, when computing systems began to become networked by the late 70s, and by the 1980s, personal computers with these capacities were becoming commonplace around the world. But the United States did not build computing systems for users. At no point did they want that to occur. These essential systems and the network, the things that became the basis for email and the internet, that were developed to be used by imperialist state actors, military contractors, and military members. But because they could not be developed only by those limited numbers of people, but had to be developed by real workers, these real workers started to use them for things like email and the internet. This was a minor miracle, and believe me when I say that if the United States could have figured out a way to stop that from happening, the way that they simply installed a fascist dictator to stop technological planned economy from spreading around the world and becoming viable, they would have done so. But that would have involved killing a lot of Americans, a project which would have backfired. The only reason that you are alive and not murdered by the imperialist state and the private corporations that it serves is because they fear that doing such a thing would blow back on them. This is a recurring theme in your life, and you should be wise enough to recognize that. I drew a parallel to this desired suppression of networked computing for the masses in the form of today's internet, and the development of these large language open source models. If the United States and empire generally had its way, this thing would not exist. But there are many countries, and so some of the open source large language model projects have been developed well outside of the imperial core. And you'll probably notice that as you move away from the center of the empire, the fascist United States, the U.S. imperial projects, you see more and more such things. That's no coincidence. So let us not, for a moment, ever suppose that the current bourgeois AI takeoff is building something viable or in any way benevolent or super intelligent. Again, it can only be described as super stupidity. This is a thing that is presently exacerbating inequality. AI driven automation under this far right neoliberal capitalism of recent decades has led to job displacement and increased concentration of wealth. There's a man who is now uh, believed to be pushing up to $500 billion of net worth, and this affects generally a massive gap between the rich and poor. Many millions of people in the US who are living out of their cars, who are living in tents. Many of those people who are unstably housed are not counted among the unhoused because they have a couch to crash on most of the time. Things along these lines. But that is not housing. And this problem has gotten dramatically worse in this hypercapitalist and neoliberalistic era. Surveillance and control systems have developed of a kind that would have horrified your ancestors. The erosion of civil liberties is mind boggling. And these are being used to monitor and control populations. I was involved in some discourse in a limited way as to the phrase that is sometimes repeated: Google is your friend. Google's motto, one of their slogans, used to be "Don't be evil." In the early days, before they grew into a full fledged military industrial dystopian surveillance state abomination, they stopped saying such things because they knew that people would not be able to say such words with a straight face when talking about Google. This is true of large technological concerns of the United States almost uniformly. Weaponization of AI, the development of autonomous weapon systems being used, killer robots, and artificial super stupidity deployed for genocide in Gaza, most particularly right now. These are serious considerations, not merely ethical considerations in the abstract, but problems of your world today brought about by the U.S. empire. And these are things that are destabilizing your world to such a degree that prognosticators who talk about things like the atomic clock say that we are very, very close to full open nuclear war. In fact, according to Geiger counters, there was a sharp uptick around the time of December 15th when the United States and its fascist puppet Israel dropped a large weapon on Syria. This set the Geiger counters off the charts. Yes, the fascist United States and Israel used a nuclear weapon in Syria, by all accounts, in December, and no one even batted an eye. Everyone is very concerned to some degree with the problems of this kind, but there's not a lot of intellectual honesty. There's a lot of confusion around these things. There's a lot of lies and gaslighting and self-deception. And so when things of this kind occur, there's hardly even a coherent narrative around them. Almost no one has discussed this. You won't see conversations about it on the far-right imperialist, effectively state-run mainstream U.S. media. This problem is closely related to the problems that I've described already at some length: the ecological destruction, the ticking time bomb of capitalism's climate apocalypse causing runaway overheating after 2029 if we do not take heed. This is closely associated because this weaponization of advanced computing for autonomous weapon systems, killer robots, and artificial genocidal super stupidity. This is closely tied with the use of an enormous amount of ordnance by specifically the United States and its fascist puppet state Israel. The use of this such ordnance by the fascist state of Israel on the concentration camp of the people in Gaza, people who have been living in such conditions for many decades, who have been subjected to horrors since the Nakba of 1948 and such violence ratcheting up even in the years before. Um, this massive use of ordnance against people in Palestine, equal to many Hiroshimas and Nagasaki's, may account for about 5% or more of the total environmental impact of human beings in 2024. And when you consider other ordnance and use of weaponry specifically, that number may be 10%. 10%. That's not the super polluting U.S. Use of fossil fuels. That's weapons use specifically. 10% of the total impact, the use of the misuse of the military-industrial complex in a more general sense would be a larger number than that. This trajectory of U.S. empire, if unchecked, does not in any circumstance, in any possible way, lead to a utopian future that technological singularitarians like military contractor Ray Kurzweil often describe, but to an increasingly dystopian path that we are already clearly on, and potentially the omnicide, the destruction of all multicellular life, or at the very least, the death of nearly all of humankind. You say, Ben, I don't think that 8.2 billion people will all become extinct. Surely there will be some survivors. Let's suppose that for a moment that you are right. Consider that what you have said is just about the most racist thing that any human being has ever uttered on this planet, because who are the victims right now of the capitalist climate apocalypse? Who are the people being displaced in great numbers and dying in great numbers? They're people in the global south, people who made virtually no contribution to the problem, people who are dying for your sins because you refuse to make fossil fuels and military industrial complexes and livestock systems illegal in the global north. You refuse to let go of these luxuries and these horrors. Millions of people die for your sins already. And in that extrapolation, where not all of humankind dies, but we fail to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse, billions of people in the global south would die, a project not dissimilar from that of racist archfiend Christopher Columbus, who landed on islands in the 1500s, converted those islands to plantations, and worked everyone on those islands to a man, to death. There are no Taino people. There were Taino people across these islands. There are no Taino people today. They were worked to death. A full extermination of many islands by capitalism. This is what you are describing when you say, I don't think everyone will die, Ben. Because yes, maybe there's a few tens of millions of European descended people left, and some remnants of other populations, but what has been done here is a genocide unlike anything in human history. That is the path that we are on. That is the thing that you are whitewashing. Every word that you say that is not to do with ending the United States military-industrial complex and ending these other concerns related to the omnicide. The people's superintelligence is a path to doing this by making use of this workforce multiplier, because the thing that would be required to stop the military-industrial complex would be many millions of North Americans. China can't save you. If China engages with the fascistic, imperialist, and far-right United States in anything like this kind of way to stop this, what will happen is nuclear World War III, the likes of which no one has ever imagined. The only thing that can stop this is a righteous domestic insurrection to rise up and demand millions permanently bivouacked outside of the Pentagon, demanding the dismantling of these forces, most particularly the military industrial complex, to ensure human survival. And that is something that must be done. But the people's superintelligence and this element that I've described, this workforce multiplication, is a thing that can do this by virtue of being generally able to do more with less, without requiring millions of people opening fire on the White House. It's but you cannot rule out the need for getting your AR-15s, shining them up, cleaning them and loading them, and marching on Washington, D.C. That is a necessary element of all this. I am not going to gaslight you by saying that the people's superintelligence is a nonviolent means to do this, only that it is one part of the necessary arsenal which might put us over the top in stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse in the limited number of years that we have left. So I'll talk about the people as superintelligence in more concrete terms of its other features. The code, data, and models underlying this open source large language model work group are all freely available, accessible. It can be built out in the ways that I've described at great length in 2025. AI agents are a reality now. They've passed the Turing test effectively by many, many estimations. And building this in the way that I've described will build something collaborative, strong, agile, and transparent enough to resist being undermined by these imperialistic forces. The decentralization of this people's superintelligence should not be understated because it's not controlled by any single entity or even centered within a state operation that can be attacked. It makes it dramatically more resilient than projects like the technological planned economies that were conceived of in other lands. Democratic control, the development, employment, and deployment of the people's superintelligence must be guided by representation, democratic principles effectively, ensuring that it serves the interests of all people in perpetuity, and collective intelligence feature of this. Again, I have touched upon this, but collective intelligence of human beings and AI agents creates a possibility of a workforce multiplier, and even, if approached correctly, the possibility of artificially intelligent recursion within these systems. This should be a focus of the people's superintelligence, building ever powerful and more powerful, but democratically controlled and safe properties into these systems. The open source large language model workgroup is a workforce multiplier, as I have said, and we are already building a network composed of open source developers, researchers, activists, and ordinary citizens, perhaps like yourself, coming together, understanding the exigency of the circumstances that we face, understanding what this powerful workforce multiplier is, and collaborating on the development, training, and deployment of these increasingly strong, even without the development of the people's superintelligence, open source large language models. But again, they can be improved upon by these very forces. That should really be the chief project of the people's superintelligence at the earliest stages before it would pivot to taking on these more omnicidal forces directly. We can achieve things that no individual or state or for-profit actor has even conceived of. by this workforce multiplication when we reach many millions of users. Um, and It's important perhaps to point out that in the near term, developing the people's superintelligence by the two methods that I mentioned, the progressive web application or the ad hoc um, locally hosted large language model on machines with GPUs. The distinction there, as I perhaps did not say, being that any machine could contribute palpably to the people's superintelligence, whereas by the ad hoc form, only those with um, GPU computers could be more active participants. To realize the potential of the people's superintelligence, we must maximize participation across great numbers and great expanses of space, as I've said, to build the thing agile enough. And this also brings into play the sleeping beauty principle. This recognizes that the AI agent and the AI agentic mass is central to this, but the human beings involved, many of them, might merely be helping to keep the train on the tracks. And so you might only be required to answer a few yes or no questions to help steer the agentic mass. As you know, open source AI agents can easily hallucinate or become unproductive at the present. And even if that problem were to be overcome, say sometime around 2032 or thereabouts, we would still need to keep human beings in the loop and involved at the highest levels in as large of numbers as possible. This is the difference between the AI dystopian outcomes described by people like Eliezer Yudkowsky and many AI doomers, and the people's superintelligence, the optimists of AI, not the liars of AI like the hyper-capitalists, but the true optimists of AI. And the difference between those three outcomes, respectively, is keeping people involved and bettering material conditions of the masses as a result. This implementation of this people's superintelligence, and particularly this network of developers that I described, is called the Vanguard Network. And this network relies on some other technological features that I will not describe at greater length here for the sake of brevity. But I will say that the development of multi-agent systems has been well understood in computer science disciplines for a number of years. And the development of what this is effectively a decentralized autonomous organization utilizing a multi-agent system has been pretty well understood by both technologists and political philosophers. There's still more work to be done there in this socio-political realm of decentralized autonomous organizations. But an awful lot of people in various open source disciplines are doing good work there. We can build this thing by bringing together these communities and by bringing together the world community who quite uniformly do not want to see the extinction of humankind, but are also quite uniformly at a loss to know what to do. We can turn these people into comrades by bringing together individuals from all walks of life into this super intelligent people's formation and using advanced computing for truly positive change. This is the age of an AI takeoff, and it can be the age of a people's AI takeoff and not the age of artificial super stupidity. But we must be willing to be bold, to be clear as to the problems. And so I've asked for you to redefine this definition of revolutionary potential as described by people, serious thinkers of a revolutionary kind in decades past. because the focus on seizing the means of production, while worthwhile, just as I said, the millions of people bivouacked outside of the Pentagon would be worthwhile, may not be the path to building a thing strong enough to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse in the approximately 4 to 5 years that we have left before it is all a lost cause. And so the revolutionary potential of advanced computing must be re envisioned, and the definition itself of revolution must be re envisioned to include this prospect of a people's superintelligence, to empower the masses, and most importantly, bring about sustainable, just, equitable world where you can live. The people's superintelligence achieved through these open source large language model work groups acting as workforce multipliers and leveraging this relatively low effort sleeping beauty principle. It represents a concrete path towards realizing this revolutionary potential. It is a vision of a future where so-called AI is not a tool of fascist creep, as it is today. It is not a weapon of the oppressor pretending to be something other than what they are, but it is a force for liberation. The path toward building a people's superintelligence will not be easy. The sheer force and violence that has been unleashed on people building technological planned economies, like the Soviet Union certainly would have in the era of, if it had survived into the era of network computing, or Chile, as I mentioned, a most notable example there. We face potentially great challenges from the Imperial West in undertaking this project. But the stakes are too high for us to ignore the problems out of some moral cowardice or intellectual dishonesty. We must fight to defend the continued existence of our species, and that requires the building, in my view, in this short date, this limited 4 to 5 year time frame, of the people's superintelligence. We must resist all for-profit advanced computing and for-profit organizations generally, and embrace this vision of the people's superintelligence throughout every aspect of our lives. And if we do this, every aspect of our lives will be dramatically improved. The workforce multiplier with many hundreds of millions or billions of users would become the basis for the distribution of universal basic services across continents, or the shoring up of those in existing state formations, and other things like the building of an AI-powered single-payer public health service, which, because of the state of biogerontology and related disciplines, and because of the state of advanced computing generally, could lead to something that I have termed universal super longevity. That is indefinite lifespan for all who want it, which is, if we're being honest, everyone. On the basis of the functioning of the more fully realized public health service that is able to treat aging as a reversible condition because of these very features. Single payer public health services, AI powered, are themselves another another force multiplier. This has been well understood for more than a century. That pooling resources to take care of people at medical extremis is a very powerful tool. It is denied increasingly by the neoliberal and imperialistic West. In the mid 20th century, I believe 1948, the UK, which has never aspired to be a socialist country and never took any action of any real kind to abolish private wealth, it nevertheless had abolished private wealth in medical sectors by building a single-payer public health service. But since this era of neoliberal supremacy of recent decades, we've seen thousands of additional deaths in that country alone that we can track, and many more besides, and certainly that we cannot, because of the for-profit conversion of this previously quite reasonable National Health Service. This, in effect, in the United States, kills about 100,000 people a year. We would say before coronavirus, that number was perhaps closer to 70,000 by studies of that time. But the coronavirus in 2020 has said, another study said that because the United States did not implement public health measures and a public health service of this real kind in 2020, in response to this outbreak, 250,000 people died in that year alone. So we can say that this number in the ongoing set of pandemics that we face continues to be at around 100,000 a year. This is a horror, but this is the horror that has been well understood of financial capital for for nearly 2 centuries, that it destroys the two things that it needs most: human beings and a livable world. We can build that livable world today by embracing the revolutionary potential of the people's superintelligence and the people's AI takeoff, specifically the building of an open source large language model mass workforce multiplier. I ask you to do this thing and join with me to build this